Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to be talking about modal verbs. We have seen some of them in class, but today we are going to be focusing on modal verbs in terms of giving advice and obligation. So let's get started. So in here we have different, the sentence structure for the modal verbs. I'm going to go into detail with some of them because there are some exceptions. But in general, the affirmative form of a sentence in which you use a modal verb is going to have the subject, then we're going to have the modal verb as it is given to you, and I will go and I'll explain that in a second, plus the verb form plus the complement. Now, as you can see the examples here, the first one says you, which is the subject, must, the modal verb, where, the verb in the base form, a uniform, the complement. The second example, she should study harder, is also following this same structure, and then the other one says they have to be at school by 8 a.m. So in the third one, I want you to see how we have the subject they, and then the modal verb, we're taking it not just one word, but the word have and to, have to. And then the verb in the base form, in this case, the verb to be. Remember that the verb to be is the base form of, and then it has different variations, but the verb to be is a base form of a verb. And then we have the complement, okay? So let's move on to the next one. Okay, I am going to talk about the sentence structure in the negative form for these four specific modal verbs: must, should, ought to, and had better. For these four. So in here, we're going to have the subject, the modal verb, then we're going to add the not and the verb in the base form. So you mustn't smoke here. Must not is the same. You shouldn't eat too much sugar. You ought not to lie. Look how in this example specifically, there's a little bit of a variation because you have the subject, then you have the word ought, and then not, and then the to, which is originally part of the modal verb ought to, and then the complement lie. This is, however, as I stated in here, a less common modal to use in the negative form, okay? In here, we would say usually like you shouldn't lie, and that's it. Then the fourth example says you had better not be late. All right, so this is with these four specific modal verbs. Now let's move on. So as you can see here, the sentence structure in the negative form for these two, have to and need to, which I'm going to go into detail about them and how to use it later. But first, I want you to see the structure. In here, these modal verbs actually use the auxiliary do or does not to make it negative. All right, so you have the subject, their do or does. Depends on the subject, of course. Then we have the particle not, the modal verb, and then the modal verb referring to have to and need to, like that, exactly like that, and then the base form of the verb. So you have subject in the first example, you do not or you don't have to wake up early. She doesn't or does not is the same to bring, she doesn't need to bring her laptop, okay? So this one is a little bit different and works differently from the previous one, so you have to pay attention to that. Before I move on to the meaning or how to use the other one or what they express, I want you to pay attention to this key difference in terms of when you use the must not or mustn't and the don't have to, because when you use them in affirmative, they may have a similar meaning, but when you use it in negative, mustn't is talking about prohibition. It's something that is prohibited. Okay, you are not allowed to. While don't have to, there is a lack of necessity. It is not necessary, but it is actually possible. Must not or mustn't is forbidden, is prohibited. You cannot do it. While in the other one, you still have the possibility to do it. Now let's talk about the question form for must and should, okay? In here, we're going to apply inversion. We're going to have the modal auxiliary at the beginning. Then we have the subject, the verb in the base form, and the complement. This is the usual thing that we have been following. Must they arrive early? Remember that every time you are asked a question with a modal verb, a helping verb, or auxiliary verb, whatever you want to call it, or whatever it is, you have to answer with that same modal helping or auxiliary verb. Must they arrive early? Yes, they must, or no, they mustn't. Should we call her now? Yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't. Okay? Sentence structure for have to and need to. Well, we're going to still apply the rule of using the auxiliary verb do or does. So we're going to start with do or does, then the subject, the modal verb. Remember that we take it as have to and need to as one modal verb, and then the verb in the base form and the meaning, the complement. And the answers then in here, we're going to, if you say, do we have to attend the meeting? Yes, we do. No, we don't. In regular, like everyday life, you probably can also get like, yes, we have to, or no, we don't have to. All right, that's another possibility with these ones. Example number 2, does she need to bring her laptop? Yes, she does. No, she doesn't. Or yes, she needs to, or no, she doesn't need to, right? Do they have to wear a uniform? Yes, they do, or no, they don't. Okay, so these are some examples with the question form. This one, now move on to the next one. Question form for ought to and had better. No, these two follow their own specific structures. So, well, I'm going to go through it. So ought to, in order to make it a question, is ought I to apologize? But this is completely uncommon. People don't say that, or probably people say, but it is grammatically correct, but I wouldn't even worry about using it. Like, I've never used that structure. I will say just should I apologize, and that's it, because they're very similar in meaning. Then had better, this phrase again is rarely used in questions, but it would be had we better leave now, which is very formal and again very uncommon. I'm still giving you how this works because the experience have told me like, teacher, but this doesn't follow the structure that you gave me before. So now I realize that I still have to give you the things even when they are not very common. But just for you to know, in conversation, people will say, should I leave now? The should in this case would be the one that can replace that, and is way more common, is what people use in everyday life. These ones, they're grammatically correct, but people don't use them. Okay, now let's talk about the modal auxiliaries themselves, right? So we start with should. This one, we use it to give recommendations or advice. So, for example, you should drink more water to stay hydrated. This is a good idea, but it's not an obligation. This is something that I think could be good for you. So that's why I use the auxiliary verb should, okay? We recommend something or we give a piece of advice. So in here, then we have ought to, which is very similar to should. It says that it's a little, like a slightly stronger. So it says the example, you ought to apologize for being late. It is the right thing to do, but it is not a rule. Still, it's something that you are recommending. Like, it will be, again, you can even like, you can substitute that for should, and it will still be okay. Like, you should apologize for being late. It will be acceptable, okay? So they're like synonyms. Then we have had better. So this one is definitely stronger than should, and it often implies some sort of warning or a negative consequence if the advice is not followed. So the example says, you had better study for the test or you might fail. So this piece of advice is serious. And if you don't follow it, then something bad could happen. So this is definitely stronger. I like to think about this one, like, because yes, in Spanish we can say deberías estudiar para el examen o te vas a quedar. But there is another expression that we use, at least here in Costa Rica, that it will be like, o mejor estudia para el examen, o más le vale. It will be something like, más le vale estudiar para el examen, o se va a quedar. So that expression that we use here, at least here in Costa Rica, it's más le vale. It's like, if you don't do that, then you're going to have a consequence, right? So that's how I like to relate it. Like, if I want to say más le vale this and this and that, I'll definitely use this modal verb had better. Then we have this must for advice, and this one is used for a very, very strong recommendation when emphasizing some sort of urgency or importance. So the example says, you must try this restaurant, their food, it's amazing. So this is, of course, not an obligation for the other person to follow. Like, it's not something they have to follow when you tell them, but the speaker, me, thinks that it is extremely important. Like, with this example, it's like, if, this restaurant, like, it was fantastic, it was delicious, it was so good. So then I feel like this urgency to tell somebody else, like, you must try this restaurant, like, it's really, really good, right? So this one can be used for advice, is not an obligation, but you feel very strong about what you're expressing or suggesting or recommending. Now let's talk about must, but obligation. Now it's different. It's not a very strong advice that I give, but it's an obligation that you have. This expresses actually like a strong obligation, necessity, or a rule. So it says you must wear a seatbelt while driving. This is a rule. It is mandatory. You have to do it. Okay. Of course, when the context, it's going to be different from where we use it to give a very strong recommendation. But when you use it to express an obligation or something that is mandatory, then you use the auxiliary verb must. In this case, if we put it in a scale, this one would be the highest in terms of you have to do something, you must do something because it is a rule. Okay. Now we have obligation, have to. So it's very similar to must. What I personally like to think about these two is that must is way stronger. Is like a rule. It's something that you have to do, and if you don't do it, then there's going to be a very serious consequence. It is something that is mandatory, right? As I explained before. While when we use have to, it seems like to me like it's something that you have to do because it's like a rule that is often made, or it's a requirement that it was made by an external source, right? So I have this example here. I have to finish my assignment before the deadline. So I have to do that because there is a deadline. The deadline is something that was established by somebody else, an external source. It wasn't me, right? Like, that's basically it. So someone else decided this rule, and it's not my personal choice. So this is why I have to. Tengo que. Now we move on to obligation for need to. Okay, so need to, as it says, expresses necessity, but it is definitely softer than must or have to. The example says you need to call the doctor if the pain continues. And this is something that is important, but not necessarily a strict rule. Okay, so it's the same as in Spanish when you say, necesito to do something. Necesito llamar al doctor, o necesitas llamar al doctor. Okay. That's everything for today's video. Remember that these were focused only on modal verbs for advice and obligation. Complete again the worksheet that is in the Google Classroom. Bring your questions to the session with your teacher if you have any. And we'll see each other in the next video. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.